Okay, Randy Walker here, WorldTennisMagazine.com. Mesdames et messieurs, Jordan Sprechman in interview room 1 now. So we're with the legendary voice of the U.S. Open media room, Jordan Sprechman. And this is the 2024 U.S. Open. And what number U.S. Open is this for you here?
Working for the USTA, number 38.
38. So what would be the first one?
First one is 1985. I missed 2 years. I missed 1987 and 1990 for reasons that aren't worth getting into, but every year consecutively since 1991, including the pandemic year when nobody was around, basically, but I was here.
So how did you get started working in the media room and being the voice of the media room?
Well, I started off as basically a runner, and it's one of these things you know people in low places and you start working, and I would run stats around to the press and interview transcripts and result sheets and things like that. I was basically a runner, and part of that job was also to periodically make announcements. And when my predecessor didn't come back after the 1991 Open, I started doing the announcements in the old building. We're going to have another old building soon, but the old building, Louis Armstrong Stadium, starting in 1992. Did that for 5 years in Armstrong, and then I and everybody else moved over to Arthur Ashe in 1997 and been here ever since.
So for those of you who are not in the media and have not been in the media room, actually this is kind of a thing of the past because the way that the interviews are done now it's different. But Jordan's voice is, for anybody that's covered the U.S. Open, he has, obviously you could hear his famous voice, but the way that he would make announcements of when a player was in a press conference. And let's just throw back to maybe like 2018, and Novak Djokovic is going into the interview room. What would you say?
Attention press, Novak Djokovic is on his way to interview room 1 now. Djokovic, room 1 now.
So that is Willie Weinbaum from ESPN is laughing at us.
Willie's got post-traumatic stress disorder from having heard me say that
but
several thousand times.
But this is a part of just what's one of those great things about the U.S. Open is just there's stories on every corner and not just the players. But Jordan is a legend. Here for saying that, and every time I see Jordan every year at the U.S. Open, the first thing I say to him is "Mesdames et messieurs," which is how I opened up this interview, and that's because Jordan was also the voice of the 1996 Olympic media press room, and that is a bilingual event because it's English and French and so forth.
Well, not the media center, not the media room, but the voice at Stone Mountain, Georgia, the voice of the Olympics at the tennis venue in 1996 itself. So I was the one who got to say, now, I did English language only. I happened to be able to speak French, so I could have spoken French. Didn't, because we had a French language public address announcer, and she did her job, although we did flip once at the end of the tournament when we figured by that time, even if we did flip, we weren't going to get fired anyway. So we each did an announcement in the other language. But yeah, mesdames et messieurs, or attention press. And that was actually a great thrill for me personally because at the 96 Olympics, 4 competitions, men's and women's singles, men's and women's doubles. Both singles winners were Americans, Andre Agassi, Lindsay Davenport, and Mary Jo and Gigi Fernandez won the women's doubles on the women's side. And if the Americans couldn't win, we might as well have the Australians win. So Mark Woodford and Todd Woodbridge won the gold for the Australians at the Olympics. And that was actually a great thrill, being able to say, Olympic champion and gold medalist representing the United States of America, pause, and then so on.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I was there as the press officer for the U.S. team, and that was a really magical Olympics. But now, so Jordan, you also do other sports. Like you're in the press room at. Talk about what other sports events you work in the press room at.
So I'm the internal public address announcer. The fans in the stands cannot hear me, but at New York Jets home football games, I am the voice of the press box, and I do the announcements. gain of 6 for Jones, 6, tackle by Smith, that kind of thing, and that goes on again all game, every game for every Jets home game. And I've been doing that for about 10 years for the Jets. I've been working on the Jets stats crew longer than I've been working at the Open. I've been working on the Jets stats crew since 1981, and for those who are old enough to remember, in 1981 the Jets were still playing their home games at Shea Stadium, which used to be across the street, doesn't exist anymore.
Right, exactly.
And I am an official scorer for Major League Baseball. That's the guy who decides whether that was a hit or an error. I do that at Yankees and Mets home games, and that doesn't require as much public address announcing, but on occasion when you have to make a call, it's base hit, E5, wild pitch, pass ball, and so forth. The runs in the New York third inning are unearned, not earned, that kind of thing.
Okay, and then during the day, what do you do?
During the day, I work for a financial institution, J.P. Morgan Chase Bank. J.P. Morgan Chase happens to be a sponsor of the U.S. Open, but I started working for the U.S. Open long before I started working for J.P. Morgan Chase. So even though there is a connection there, I was working here before I was working there.
So talk about the pandemic U.S. Open 2020. I mean, you talk to a lot of people who have been to many U.S. Opens. They say, oh, I've been to every U.S. Open since 1977, 1994, et cetera, except the 2020 year. But you're one person who can say you were here. So what was it like here on the grounds and also in the media room?
It was desolate, basically. There was basically nobody here. It was actually, I mean, to some extent, it was kind of nice because I actually got the best parking you can get, parking lot A, because there was nobody here. You come in every day, every third or fourth day, you had to get a COVID test. You had to go across the way over here. And if you were tested positive for COVID, which I was not, you got sent home and you couldn't come back until you tested negative again. And again, in 2 weeks, it would probably be fairly hard to clear yourself of a COVID diagnosis, a positive test. And during the Open, there were literally about a dozen reporters here. They all sat in a corner. They weren't allowed to interact with the players, and so everything was done virtually by Zoom during the pandemic year. And it was a weird, eerie atmosphere. The people, I mean, on a day like today, we're going to have 60, 70,000 people walking around. Then it was the players, it was the officials, it was a couple of people in the media, and obviously operations people and things like that. But it was really nobody around, and it was actually a little sad. But I'm glad that I'm glad we had the tournament. Because actually one of the things I love about the U.S. Open tennis tradition is it's been played continuously every year since 1881, no exceptions. Every other major has had an interruption for one reason or another. Wimbledon famously that year did not have a tournament in 2020, but the U.S. Open continues on regardless of what else may be going around in the world.
Yeah, no, I can speak for, I was not here in 2020, but it was just great to have that relief to be able to watch tennis on television. And, kudos to Stacey Allister, U.S. Open Tournament Director of the USTA, staff. Brian Hainline, who's now the president of the USTA, obviously with his medical background, was very involved in making that U.S. Open happen. So, your voice, which is so synonymous with the U.S. Open, is kind of silenced now because the media room operations and how players or how media know that media are coming is changed. And I've been saying to a lot of people, like, this tournament is one of the best, I think, sporting events in the world as far as access to players, because pretty much every player that gets requested for press does a press conference in either interview room 1, interview room 2, interview room 3, or the smaller rooms in interview room 4, interview room 5, or the media garden where we are here. But it's now done through a WhatsApp chat, which is every media person can sign up for, and they know exactly when the press person or when the player is going to be in the press conference, so they could be on court 17 or the grandstand, and they'll know exactly when to come back for the press conference. So unfortunately, Jordan's voice is largely silenced now. So just talk a little bit about how that's changed the last couple of years.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are fewer announcements to make because there is that WhatsApp capability, and to some extent it's fine, because if you're in the media center and you're trying to do your job, if you hear my voice, or frankly anybody else's voice, but it's often my voice, coming over the public address, it can get to be probably quite irritating. And actually for 25 years, we've been talking about what the right balance is for the number of announcements to make. Should we be announcing juniors? Do we really need to announce the doubles team? So the fact that there's the WhatsApp capability gives you a little bit more flexibility in how often you want to make the announcements, because we're in the press service business. We're not in the business of making announcements for the sake of announcements. We want to communicate information as quickly as we can, in the right way, and sometimes the right way is simply by a text or WhatsApp, and sometimes the way to do it is by an actual announcement. As we get later in the tournament, we're going to be making the announcements, I'd say, relatively speaking, more frequently, because now everybody's in the quarterfinals. Everybody's going to somebody in the press is going to want to interview every single one of those players. The players have a lot of demands on their time. One of the things that we're very conscious of is making sure that if players are coming early or sometimes coming late because of other demands, that if we have posted a time on a WhatsApp, if the time is going to vary even by a little bit, that the reporters, especially if people coming early, know that, and so we're going to make those announcements at that time. But we try to be thoughtful about it in that way.
Well, who's the guy that was, I'm drawing a blank here, the famous voice of the Yankees?
Bob Sheppard.
Bob Sheppard. So Bob Sheppard is this legendary voice. If you've never been to a Yankees game, you may not know, but his voice is what they call the voice of God, right?
The voice of God, yes.
And I remember Derek Jeter would still have Bob Sheppard's voice, in his last year and so forth. So we're going to need to, somebody's going to need to have you say, like, every player, every champion who's ever won the U.S. Open, they need to have their own, introduction to the press room. So why don't we, to sign off here, why don't you do a Serena Williams in the press room announcement for posterity here?
For that, I'm going to tell a Bob Sheppard story because it relates to tennis. When I got the gig to work in Atlanta in 1996, I went to Bob, because I work at Yankees home games, and Bob, public address announcer, who better to talk about public address announcing than Bob Sheppard, who at that point had been working for the Yankees for 45 years, and I went in to see him. And Bob talked the way he talked, not as an affectation, that's actually how he talked. I said to him, Bob, I'm doing this job, do you have any tips? And he said to me exactly this way, he said, Jordan, you have been listening to me long enough not to need any advice. Just remember these three things. Keep it simple, keep it short, keep it slow. And I got news for you. If you're going into public address, you remember those three rules, you're never going to go wrong. But to answer your final question, attention press. Serena Williams is on her way to interview room 1 now. Serena Williams, room 1 now.
Perfect. Okay, we need to get that. The USDA needs to get every champion. When you win this tournament, you should get your own Jordan Sprechman in the interview room audio tape for posterity. So, Jordan, thanks for chatting. Randy Walker, WorldTennisMagazine.com, over and out from the U.S. Open.